Good day, everyone. We are the reporters, and today we will be discussing about the ULOC, which is to identify parts of the brain for cognitive processes. So let's proceed. Biological and neurological basis of the cognitive processes in learning. Neurons is the cell that transmit information throughout the body. Neurons are nerve cells specialized for communication in the brain. They're basically responsible for thought, and without them, we couldn't really think, and we probably wouldn't even be alive. We have lots of different neurons in our brains. It's estimated that every human brain contains approximately 85 billion neurons. Neurons also come in a variety of shapes and sizes, but they all have one job: to transmit information throughout your mind and body. Just like copper wire transmit electricity, or like telephone lines transmit calls, or fiber optic cables transmit data, so that we can watch videos. Axons, it is also called as potentials, are thread-like cells that transmit impulses outward the cell body. This picture is an axon. An axon is a thin fiber that extends from a neuron or nerve cell, and is responsible for transmitting electrical signals to help with sensory perception and movement. Axons can be very short, communicating with cells nearby, or very long. For example, the longest axon in your body runs your lower back all the way down to your big toe. Each axon is surrounded by a myelin sheath. As you can see in the picture that has white sheath, that is what we call myelin sheath. Myelin sheath is a fatty layer that insulates the axons and help it transmit signals over long distances. Myelin is kind of like the plastic that coats the outside of a wire, and it is important for allowing cells to communicate very quickly across your whole body. Dendrites. These are extensions of nerve cells that receive electrical signals from other neurons. As you can see in the picture, dendrites are the finger-like cells present on the end of a neuron. They are short, branching fibers extending from the cell body of the nerve cell. This fiber increases the surface area available for receiving incoming information. The dendrites collect messages through the other neurons or the nerves in the human body. These messages are passed through the nervous system towards the brain, where the brain sends the instructions back to different parts of the body so that a reaction can occur. The nervous system serves as the manager of the body, since it controls the functions of every other system. It communicates with bodily system in order to coordinate performance and to meet the needs of the body from moment to moment. The nervous system transmits signals between the brain and the rest of the body, including internal organs. In this way, the nervous system's activity controls the ability to move, breathe, see, think, and more. The nervous system has two main parts: the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. So I will discuss first the central nervous system. The central nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord. Our brains have two primary functions, which are to control behavior and to regulate the body's physiological processes. However, the brain cannot do this alone, as it needs to receive information from the body's sense receptors, which it achieves through communication with the spinal cord. The CNS is named central because aside from occupying the central position of the body, the CNS is also the most important part of the nervous system for maintaining and producing behavior. The peripheral nervous system is a division of the nervous system containing all the nerves that lie outside of the central nervous system. The primary role of the PNS is to connect the CNS to the organs, limbs, and skin. These nerves extend from the central nervous system to the outermost area of the body. The peripheral system allows the brains and spinal cord to receive and send information to other areas of the body, which allows us to react to stimuli in our environment. The peripheral nervous system itself is divided into two parts, the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. The somatic system is the part of the peripheral nervous system responsible for carrying sensory and motor information and from the central nervous system, while the autonomic system is the part of the peripheral nervous system that is responsible for regulating involuntary body functions such as blood flow, heartbeat, digestion, and breathing. Each of these components plays a critical role on how the peripheral nervous system operates.
The hindbrain is often referred to as the lower brain. It mainly supports bodily functions and it is the link between the spinal cord and the brain. It is important for movement and balance. It is also comprised of the medulla, pons, cerebellum, and part of the reticular formation. The medulla oblongata is responsible for regulating several basic functions of the autonomic nervous system, including respiration, cardiac function, vasodilation, and reflexes like vomiting, coughing, sneezing, and swallowing. The pons is the largest part of the brainstem, located above the medulla and below the midbrain. It is a group of nerves that function as a connection between the cerebrum and the cerebellum. This part of the brain is responsible for coordinating voluntary movements. It is also responsible for a number of functions including motor skills such as balance, coordination, and posture.
Midbrain is also known as mesencephalon. It is part of the brain that contains neural centers responsible of our eyes and body movements responding to visuals and auditory stimuli. This tiny but mighty structure plays a crucial role in processing information related to hearing, vision, movement, pain, sleep, and arousal. Reticular formation. It is a finger-based set of neurons, a portion of the brain that is located in the central core of the brainstem. It passes through the medulla, pons, and stops in the midbrain. Its functions can be classified into four categories. Those are motor control, sensory control, visceral control, and control of consciousness. Forebrain, the responsible for relaying sensory information to the cerebral cortex. It represents one of the three major development divisions of the brain. The other two are the midbrain and hindbrain. Cerebrum, the largest part of the brain and is composed of right and left hemispheres. It performs higher functions like interpreting touch, vision, and hearing, as well as speech, reasoning, emotions, learning, and fine control of movement. Cerebellum is located under the cerebrum. It is also the source of intellect and enables you to think, plan, read, hold memories, and process emotions, among many other tasks. Hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is the area in which the nervous and hormonal system of the body interact. It receives information relating to hormone levels, physical and mental stress, the emotion and the need for physical activity, and responds by prompting the pituitary appropriately. It influences the pituitary gland, also known as master gland, facilitate the release of its own hormones. Small structure that is in charge of our emotions. It regulates the drives of thirst, hunger, sex, and aggression. Thalamus. The thalamus plays a part in motor control by providing positive reinforcement of movements initiated in the motor cortex, responsible for relaying sensory information to the cerebral cortex. It is also responsible for integrating information, learning, and memory.
Good day everyone! We are here today to tackle about creating learning objectives. So we have here articulating the learning objectives in the classroom. First, let us define what is learning objectives. A learning objectives is an outcome statement that captures specifically what knowledge, skills, attitudes learners should be able to exhibit by following instruction. The importance of learning objectives is it is the process of establishing a direction to guide learning and set student expectations, and help them focus their study time for the upcoming activities, performance, and examinations. Articulating learning objectives will help teachers select and organize course content and determine appropriate assessments and instructional strategies. Students direct their learning efforts appropriately and monitor their own progress. Number 1. Learning objectives involves part of elements. They are as follows. First, a specificity of students' behavior. Classroom behavior is a stimulus-driven response that occurs specifically within the classroom or how students are acting in the classroom in response to what is going on or present around them. As a facilitator, you must know that it's not easy to deal with different behavior of students, including these examples. Withdrawn behaviors such as shyness, rocking, staring, anxiety, school phobia, truancy, social isolation, or hand flapping. Also disruptive behaviors, violent and or unsafe behaviors, and lastly inappropriate social behaviors. Next is a description of a specific performance that students will exhibit. Learning objectives are also a way to establish and articulate academic expectations for students so they know precisely what is expected of them. When learning objectives are clearly communicated to students, the reasoning goals students will be more likely to achieve the presented goals. Next is description of the specific result of instruction. An instructional objective is a statement that will describe what the learner will be able to do after completing the instruction. Instructional objectives are specific, measurable, short-term, observable student behaviors that indicate the desirable knowledge, skills, or attitudes to be gained. Next is written and language that students can understand. Language objectives are how the students will show what they are learning. They are focused on the 4 domains of speaking, listening, reading, and writing, using well-written language to examine new experiences and knowledge in relation to their prior knowledge, experiences, and beliefs. Language helps students develop an awareness of the skill and strategies that they need to complete learning tasks successfully and to communicate about themselves as learners who need to be able to use academic vocabulary in order to both understand and communicate their understanding of the academic content we teach. Next is written for students to remain focused. Articulating learning objectives helps instructors determine assessment creation. Well-written learning objectives will help you build focused assessment aligned with the critical learning components of your course. Articulating learning objectives helps instructors practice good course design and make students remain focused. Next is used by students and teachers throughout the lesson to monitor progress toward learning. Monitoring offers the opportunity to assess the progress of the students and often provides an indication of what to reteach or practice further. The teacher should always be aware of how the class is getting on, whether the pace is too fast or too slow, and which students may need individual attention. Next is relevant to students, not to teachers. Relevance then helps students see that the content is worth knowing by showing how it fits into their current and future frame of reference. As instructors, one of the most important things we do is provide relevance for students. Relevance can help students realize how useful all knowledge can be. teachers must focus on students' learning outcome. Next is statements that serve as a roadmap for the students to know where they are headed. Learning objectives should be used to guide students as they work through the course and to assess their learning progress. Excellent learning objectives provide a guide for students when reviewing materials and preparing for assessments. Both students and teachers will experience greater success in the program if they know where they are headed. Evaluations are used in a course to measure whether students have achieved the learning objectives. It is more powerful if they are actionable and measurable. Next is written in single statement. It is important that learning objectives is written in clear, brief, and concise to avoid redundant words and so students understand it easily. Next is make use of verbs from Bloom's taxonomy. Benjamin Bloom was an American educational psychologist who made contribution to the classification of educational objectives and to the theory of mastery learning, who created a taxonomy of measurable verbs to help us describe and classify observable knowledge, skills, attitudes, behaviors, and abilities. By creating learning objectives using measurable verbs, you indicate explicitly and what the student must do in order to demonstrate learning. Next is focus exclusively on student activities and performance, not on teachers' behavior. Teachers' attitudes can help or hurt student motivation, achievement, and well-being. Recent studies found that negative teacher attitudes can impair academic achievement and increase student psychological disorders and physical symptoms of stress. Instead, a teacher should contribute on engaging students in the learning process that will increase their attention and focus. It motivates them to practice higher-level critical thinking skills and promotes meaningful learning experiences. Next is emphasize student learning outcomes. Developing learning outcomes means that the context of the learning will always be emphasized, and courses focused on the knowledge and skills that will be most valuable to the student now and in the future. Learning outcomes allow instructors to set the standards by which the success of course will be evaluated. Next is help teachers and students begin the lesson with the end in mind. Collaborative learning has been shown to not only develop higher level thinking skills in students but boost their confidence and self-esteem as well. Supporting the instructional role of teachers, collaboration plays a key role in building relationships among teachers and derive personal fulfillment from their work. Teachers and students share the same goal to achieve learning outcomes from the objectives being presented and end the lesson successfully. Next is learning objectives should be considered as more of an art rather than a science, develop over time and help us review what have been done for the overall impact of student learning, require ongoing review and brainstorming with colleagues and students. Now, let us proceed with number 2, purpose of learning objectives. Learning objectives give directions to what students should achieve after instruction, such as the following. First, guide students in instructional planning, delivery, and evaluation of students' performance. Planning instruction around students' readiness, interest, and learning preferences empowers them to drive their own learning. Even the best lesson plans do not survive unchanged on the first contact with students. Learners evaluate a lesson based on their readiness, their sense that it's something they can do. Basic examples of this includes students practice reading or writing with the help of the teacher. Second, students practice reading or writing strategies with the help of the teacher in the form of prompts, reminders, and encouragement. Next is help students develop focus as they set their learning priorities. Goal setting helps students to be more aware of the learning that they are expected to experience. This awareness helps students to be engaged in the learning process. Mastery-oriented goals give students the opportunity to focus on learning standards in their own growth. Next is provide opportunities for analysis relative to teaching and learning. Providing opportunities could help to clarify, organize, and prioritize learning. They help teachers and students evaluate progress and encourage them to take responsibility for their learning. Teachers can facilitate learning by making the educational process easier for students. Facilitating learning involves teaching students to think critically and understand how the learning process works. Next is make teaching more focused and organized. Being focused and organized when it comes to routines and procedures are carefully taught, modeled, and established in the classroom. Children know what's expected of them and how to do certain things on their own. Having these predictable patterns in place allows teachers to spend more time in meaningful instruction. Next is guide and behavior. It is important to guide students' behavior inside the classroom since behavioral objective is one that is considered to be observable and measurable. Behavior is generally construed to be an action of an individual that can be seen, felt, or heard by another person. State each objective so that it includes only one general learning outcome. Next is identify the purpose and rationale of the lesson before requiring students for active engagement. It is important to have a background knowledge about the lesson topic that the teacher will be presenting. So before anything else, teacher will easily identify the strengths and weaknesses of the objectives when learning outcomes did not meet the expected active engagement of students. Next is provide clarity including challenges and standards. Standards are milestones for the students. They set reasonable expectations for what students can achieve at each grade level. And standards help schools evaluate the effectiveness of their programs. To some extent, standards should inform instructions. While challenge is the core of the growth mindset, without it, students don't get the opportunities to take risks, learn to fail, and figure out how to pick themselves again. Next is help improve performance and increase the students' motivation level. People are motivated by what interests and engage them. Motivation uplifts students' enthusiasm about the activities presented to them. Once they get motivated to achieve something by doing the task, they will eventually exert their full effort, time, and energy. Examples: first, focus on high-impact activities. Second, create new challenges. Third, set attainable goals. Fourth, find a social support network. And fifth, acknowledge your accomplishments. Next is provide models for writing achievable objectives so that students too can set their achievable objectives, developing lifelong learning skills. It is important to provide recommendation on how the students could cope up with the objectives being presented. Examples of this includes 5 steps to writing clear and measurable learning objectives. First, identify the level of knowledge necessary to achieve your objective. Second, select an action verb. Third, create your very own objective. Fourth, check your objective. And lastly, repeat, and repeat. Next is determine where a certain learning experience is best situated within a larger curriculum. And lastly, help select the appropriate learning experience and evaluation strategies. Strategies help students to bypass their areas of weakness and to perform at the level at which they are capable. Strategies promote flexible thinking and teach students the importance of shifting their approaches to different tasks. While a good learning experience focuses on being authentic, interactive, and collaborative to enhance engagement and improve knowledge retention. Besides, it adds value to the learner, encourages social learning, promotes learner self-assessment, and is inquiry-based. while strategies help students begin to understand the process of learning.
Let's talk about components of lesson objectives. Teachers are responsible to determine first the point of the lesson. They have to formulate objectives with the ABCD components: the audience, behavior, condition, and degree of performance. A well-constructed learning objective describes an intended learning outcome and contains four components. Number one, determine who will achieve the objective, and that is the audience. Use action verbs to write observable and measurable behavior that shows mastery of the objective, and that is behavior. Number three, if any, state the condition under which behavior is to be performed, and that is condition. And the last one is, if possible, state the criterion for acceptable performance, speed, accuracy, quality, and many more, and that is degree of performance.
Audience. The audience is usually the students. In writing our lesson objectives, we consider the learning styles that will work best for them and their specific needs that need to be addressed. To begin, determine what past knowledge your student has. Check if any of the resources you wish to give are familiar to your students. What kind of background do they have before entering the classroom? You will be able to construct an inventive course with unique content by taking into account their useful prior expertise. There is information that your students are unaware of. Giving all students a pre-test or a pre-course quiz can be used to assess prior knowledge. The next is behavior. This refers to actions that describes an observable student behavior. This is also the competency to be learned in performance terms. Frequently used terms as know, appreciate, grasp, understand, have faith in, and internalize do not meet his requirement. It's not difficult to comprehend the various behaviors displayed by students. Individuals could be classified into three groups based on their intellectual behavior using Bloom's taxonomy theory. Students' capacity to apply new abilities they've learned and how they exhibit understanding of the new skills can be determined by observing and assessing their behavior. Learning occurs in three different learning domains according to Bloom. Number one, cognitive domain. Number two, affective domain. And number three, psychomotor domain. The ability to think and apply one's brain power is referred to as cognitive domain learning. The student's ability to manage conflict as well as their emotional stability and growth are referred to as affective domain learning. The physical capacity of a student to utilize an instrument or tool is referred to as psychomotor domain learning. Let's have a quick history about who is Benjamin Samuel Bloom. Benjamin Samuel Bloom, born on February 21, 1913, and died on September 13, 1999. He was an educational psychologist in the United States who contributed to the classification of educational objectives and the motion of mastery learning. The next is condition. These are used to give students limitations. To understand behavior, students must also understand the context in which the behavior is to be performed. Example statements of such conditions include given set of rules. Using the poem The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. These can also relate to specific tools and supplies that students may need in the classroom or throughout the session. Consider the following. What sort of equipment do you have? And is it necessary to reach your goal? Which items should not be permitted in the classroom? Will having too many objects in the classrooms be distracting and hamper learning? Keep in mind that the learner's performance, and as a result, overall conduct, is influenced by the circumstances. Next, degree of performance or criterion level. This describes how well the behavior must be performed to satisfy the intent of the behavioral verb. It also states the level of acceptable performance by which students will be assessed. The final component in the ABCD approach is degree, which refers to the level of performance required for a learner to be considered credible. The learning objective should be at its highest level, meaning the students should be able to generate the target with precision and without making mistakes. Eventually, the students will be unable to produce the goal at all and will make several errors. Make sure that the degree to which students are assessed in your learning objective is specific appropriately when writing it down. The criteria for what is unacceptable are vague. For example, must be able to make 80% on a multiple choice exam, or must pass a final exam, and to the instructor's satisfaction are not detailed enough to count as a degree. The ABCD method will help you clarify your learning objectives and, as a result, assist you and your students achieve better results. Objectives. These are statements that articulate the knowledge and skill we want students to acquire by the end of the lesson. Learning objectives are defined as the aims that a learner should achieve by the end of a class. A lesson's objective explains the fundamental knowledge and abilities that we want our students to gain from it. Simply defined, it's what the learner can accomplish after learning about the unit. The objectives or goals you want your students to achieve are directly influenced by the resources, subjects, and logical frameworks of a session.
This is the continuation of articulating the learning objectives in the classroom. Now, when we say assessment procedure, it allows us to check the degree to which students meet desired and learning objective. So we have different kind of assessments like summative assessments, formative assessments, and diagnostic assessments. Lastly, we have instructional strategies. These are probably chosen to facilitate student learning and eventually way to attain or address the objectives. Instructional strategies are teachers' techniques used to help students to become independent and strategic learners. For example, like reporting, write an essay, role plays, debates, solo projects, and etc. Next, we proceed to Bloom's taxonomy. It was created by Benjamin Bloom. He was an American psychiatrist who made several contributions to education, talent development, and mastery learning. Why should educators use Bloom's taxonomy? Well, Bloom's taxonomy helps educators develop their critical thinking skills and higher order cognitive abilities in their students. Bloom's taxonomy has 6 levels of cognitive domains. First, we need to start to the lowest level of Bloom's taxonomy, which is remember. The key verbs of remember are list, recite, outline, define, name, match, quote, recall, identify, label, and recognize. One of the examples of this level is the student will be able to recite about the topic or their lessons. Like for example, they will recite about the 6 levels of Bloom's taxonomy, something like that. The next level that we have is to understand. The key verbs or the key words of understand are describe, explain, paraphrase, restate, give original examples, summarize, contrast, interpret, and discuss. One of the examples of this level is the students will be able to describe or explain their lesson to his or her own words. The third stage level is to apply. The key verbs are calculate, predict, apply, solve, illustrate, use, demonstrate, determine, model, perform, and present. One of the examples of this level is by the end of the lesson, the student will be able to apply what knowledge they gain about their lesson, like for example problem solving, role play, or report presentation. The next level is to analyze. The key verbs are classify, break down, categorize, analyze, diagram, illustrate, criticize, simplify, and associate. Like for example, students will be able to analyze like how to differentiate about two things or memorizing the important part of their lesson. Next is evaluate, and the key verbs are choose, support, relate, determine, defend, judge, grade, compare, contrast, argue, justify, convince, select, and evaluate. Students will be able to defend their answers. So one of the example of this is when they conduct a research, they need to defend their research papers. The last level of Bloom's taxonomy is to create, where the students possess the ability to build on what they learned, like for example, quizzes, examinations, or do an essays. So the key verbs of create are design, formulate, build, invent, create, compose, generate, derive, modify, and develop.
In our sim, we have here the taxonomy of objectives in affective domain, and here are the affective domain levels. The 5 levels of affective domain: the receiving, responding, valuing, organization, and characterization. Number 1 is receiving. This is the lowest outcome in affective domain. It means the willingness or ability to receive information and to be attentive. Receiving has 3 sublevels. 1. Awareness. It involves the conscious recognition of problem or a situation. Examples: when a teacher comes into a noisy class, there will be a sudden change in the class atmosphere. This is because the students have become aware to the presence of the teacher. Number 2 is willingness. It involves the ability to acknowledge the problem or situation instead of ignoring or avoiding it. The example continuation: when the teacher comes in the class, they keep quiet because they notice and acknowledge the presence of the teacher. If they had ignored her presence, they would have continued to make noise in the class. Number 3. Controlled or selected attention. This involves learners selecting or choosing to pay attention to the situation. Examples: when a teacher teaches in the class, learner is aware on what the teacher is saying. Students deliberately shut off any distraction around them. Other examples of verbs: ask, chooses, describe, follows, gives, holds, identifies, locates, names, points to, selects, sits, erects, replies, and uses. Number 2 is responding. Responds to the events by participating, attends, and reacts to a particular phenomenon. The learner shows interest and actively participated in learning activity. Learning outcomes in this subdomain may emphasize 3 sublevels of responding. Number 1 is compliance in responding. It means simply obedience or compliance. Number 2, willingness to respond. Voluntarily responds to a given situation. Number 3, satisfaction to response. Means satisfaction when he responds to a learning activity. These are the examples. A. Students participates in class discussions. B. Students gives a presentation. C. Questions new ideas, concepts, models, and etc. in order to fully understand them. D. Knows the safety rules and practice them. These are the examples of verbs: answers, assists, aids, compiles, conforms, discusses, helps, greets, labels, performs, practices, presents, reads, recites, reports, selects, tells, and writes. Number 3, valuing. Individual sets guidelines for controlling their own behavior. Value a learner attaches to a particular object or situation. Example, working in a group. A desire to improve, commitment to assume responsibility for the effective functioning of the group. There are 3 subdomains of valuing. First is acceptance. In this situation, the learners believes tentatively in a condition or situation. Number 2, preference. In this case, the learners believed in the necessity of particular condition, ignoring all alternatives and deliberately looks for other people's views on controversial issues to form own opinion. Number 3 is commitment. In this case, the learner is convinced and fully committed to the doctrine, principle, or cause and consequence. The learner internalizes a specific value, and these values can see in this behavior, attitudes, and appreciation. Examples: A. The learner demonstrates belief in a democratic process. B. The learner is sensitive towards individual cultural differences or value diversity. C. The learner is able to show the ability to solve problems. Example of verbs: completes, demonstrates, differentiates, explains, follows, forms, initiates, invites, join, justifies, proposes, reads, reports, selects, shares, studies, and works. Number 4, organization. It is the learner's internalization of values and beliefs. It starts to bring values as an organized system, determines the interrelationships by comparing, relating, and synthesizing the values. There is 2 sublevels of organization. Number 1, conceptualization of a value. Understanding of the relationships of abstract elements of a value or acceptance of new values. Number 2, organization of value system. Development of a complex value system leads the individual to develop a philosophy of life to avoid dependence upon others. The individual also recognizes the need of balance between freedom and reasonable behavior. Examples of these are: A. Learners accepts responsibility for one's behavior. B. Explain the role of systematic planning in solving problems. C. The learner accepts professional ethical standards. Examples of verbs: adheres, alters, arrange, combines, compares, completes, defends, explains, formulates, generalizes, identifies, integrates, modifies, orders, organizes, prepares, relates, and synthesizes. And last but not the least is characterization. This is the highest level in attitude formation. The person acts consistently in accordance with his values, beliefs, or ideas according to his philosophy in life. There are 2 sublevels of characterization. First, generalized set. It means to act consistently and effectively in a complex environment, revises his judgments, and changes behavior as a result of valid evidence. Number 2 is characterization. In this case, the learner is consistently acting in harmony with value system. Examples of these: A. The learner shows self-reliance when working independently. B. Cooperates in a group activity. C. Uses an objective approach to problem solving. Examples of verbs: acts, discriminates, display, influences, listens, modifies, performs, practices, proposes, qualifies, questions, revises, serves, solves, and verifies.
See the below the picture of taxonomy of objectives in psychomotor domain. It has an action word, definition, and verbs. The psychomotor domain taxonomy of Elizabeth Simpson, 1972, is based on the work of Bloom, Krathwohl, and others. Simpson's psychomotor domain is concerned with the use and coordination of motor abilities. Her classification system stresses the growth of skill mastery from observation to creation. The psychomotor domains of Harrow and Simpson are particularly useful for the development of children and young people, as well as for the development of the skills in adults that acquire them to step outside of their comfort zone. Dave's psychomotor domain is the simplest and generally easiest to apply in the corporate development environment. That's all. Thank you.